meets mine, we ponder, we dream.
Awesome. So thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other nowadays, through Zoom, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always say I'm a career software developer, now a CEO of GraphFlit, and so really always been interested in kind of knowledge and media, and now when we kind of call it unstructured data. So it's kind of always been a passion of mine for my whole career.
Unstructured data is basically everything that's out there that's hard to find, right? Or what's the best definition of unstructured data?
Yeah, I typically just say anything that doesn't kind of fall into looking like a spreadsheet is kind of unstructured.
You mean reality or the world?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean I mean it really is kind of anything that I mean kind of can be created in a I mean, kind of a page level or over time, like with audio and video, things like that. But it's such a wide bucket. So yeah, we try and look at everything, even geospatial data. I mean, can be considered that as well.
Right, right. And so what do you do with it? I mean, are you just like a search engine for it, or how where do you fit?
Yeah, so we actually started off really on the ingestion side, so bringing all the data in, indexing it for search, and then now over the last couple of years with LLMs, really the concept is how do you provide that data to the models to get answers, and so but also the special thing we do is really extracting knowledge and organizing that knowledge and using knowledge graphs for that. And that's kind of been a thread through the whole company of really figuring out how do you find all those interconnected kind of relationships between the data as well.
Right. So I mean, it took me a while to figure out how knowledge graphs work.
Yeah.
What's a great, can you do like a quick, like layperson's description of how they work and how they help?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mean, has used one just if they've used Google. I mean,
Right.
the relationship that kind of Google started with this concept, they called it things, not strings. I mean, kind of
Hmm.
thinking about everything as people, organizations, places, and their relationships. And I mean, that's the way I look at it is, I mean, if you pull out those sort of objects or nodes, we can call them in a graph, and figure out how they're connected. Like I had worked for Microsoft. Microsoft is in Seattle, and it's a sentence format almost, and the nouns and the verbs are really the edges in the graph, and so that's really or the nodes and the edges, and that's the way I look at it. And what we try and do is now there's been, I mean, this is not new. I mean, this kind of organization had kind of been for years, but now with GPT-4 and Anthropic models, you can actually use the LLMs to build those relationships or extract those relationships. And I think that's been over the last year, 18 months, such a big movement where it's way easier to do that. And it makes it easier to find stuff is like the simplest way to talk about it.
So you can conceivably throw a bunch of unstructured data into this, and then it would come back and show you patterns. And
Yep.
what would it show you?
Yeah, so I mean, one project I'm working on right now is in the healthcare space, biopharma space. And so literally can take a PDF that's, I mean, 50 pages and pull out the medical drugs, the medical conditions, procedures, tests. I think we just added like a dozen new entities, so the nodes in the graph, and it can automatically find all those relationships. And so that then makes it easier to search on. Because you can then filter and say, okay, only give me the documents back that mention this drug. And so that, but you can get a lot more complex than that. And then what we're doing is now we can actually add the metadata, the detail about those entities back to the language model and kind of give it more context. And where it really gets fun is you can then go to other services and pull in extra data. You can say, oh, hey, I'm going to go to Wikidata or some other server and pull in information on this drug, which wasn't in the original document. And so that's where those pathways that you create get super interesting, that you can start kind of pulling in and organizing data from different sources.
Right. And then had that situation where you've been able to put in a bunch of data from different disparate sources and it actually comes up with new insights that no one ever had seen before?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a blog post right now to show at least the quality of the answer. So
Hmm.
when you simply just by having that extra context, you can get more relevant answers. And so I
Right.
think, and I mean, we've proven it already. It's, I mean, 10-20% better kind of answers just from simply providing that extra context. And so, but really the other part is, I mean, if there's context that you pulled from another source, you're never going to get that from the original, I mean, documentation. Like, I mean, think
Hmm.
about if you go and scrape Microsoft's like website and you pull in 100 web pages, it's probably not going to have their current stock price, or it's not going to have their number of employees. But you can go to a different service like Crunchbase or Wikipedia or something and have that data, and you can now pull in that information as well. So when you ask a question, you can get more depth to it, and
Right.
that's where I see it. I mean, even just having a Wikipedia description of every entity, I've seen give noticeably better answers because it just kind
Right.
of has more background material. So
So it's able to present for humans, but it can't make those correlations for you. Like I was thinking in the like that in the patent space, for example. I mean, I have a number of patents, and I know that there's so many patents out there, and a lot of times when you want to do some new patenting, you look in the white spaces between the patents, right? And you think
mhm.
AI would be perfect for this because all you do is you sort of load in the entire corpus of everything that's already out there and go, okay, tell me what's missing, right? Are we ever going to get to that point?
That's a really interesting question because kind of negative searches of like what is it the LLMs don't seem to be great at, like
Right.
they take positive instruction very well, but like I think that's a, and maybe it's kind of above my pay grade in the machine learning space. There's probably a reason for that,
Right.
but I think it's an interesting thing. I mean, you can definitely find and even start to visually map out those relationships, but I think, yeah, like you said, I mean, find the white space between them. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not sure
Mhm.
why, actually. I mean, I think there's a good question there.
Well, even if it pulls together those things in such a way that
Mhm.
they've never been combined before, so that a
Yeah,
human observer can look at them and go, "Oh, I never saw that correlation," right?
yeah,
And then they can use that correlation in order to create something new. And is that kind of what you're doing as well?
yeah. I mean, I think that's where you can start to look at. I mean, from a visual standpoint, I mean, you could throw, I mean, podcast transcripts and documents and web pages and anything you have, even images that you can
Hmm.
get a description of, and you can start to see the interconnections between
Right.
that and find those clusters. And it's like maybe I didn't realize Microsoft was mentioned in these four articles or something like that.
Right.
I mean, so an example. That's where it gets really interesting, and
Yeah.
then that's where you can start to pull on the graph as a way to say, oh, okay, here, I mean, subset this data based on these relationships, and then start asking questions, or even just getting, I mean, just visualize it can be
Right.
useful as well.
Right. Absolutely. So, are you one of the founders? Are you the founder
Yeah,
of the startup?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long have you been around?
So we have been around for about 3.5 years,
Hmm.
maybe little bit
Oh, you're
more.
just a baby.
I know. And I had my previous company for 11 years. And so this is, yeah, I know we're still just on the upslope now. But yeah, I mean, I'd been at Microsoft for 6 years and then really wanted to kind of get into the kind of building something myself, and had a company in the video transcoding space for a
Oh,
number of years.
nice.
So we sold to like ESPN and Fox and NBC and folks, and then started to think about the knowledge in the media. And that's kind of what
Hmm.
transferred to this company. So.
Right, right. So did you have like a turning point where you realize like a lot of these startups have this thing where they're just trundling along, and then all of a sudden they have like a moment where they realize like this is gonna work. This is gonna fly. What was that moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting story. I mean, so I had the idea for this platform. And so basically, I'd been trying to build something like this at other companies and say,
Right.
look, you have a bunch of unstructured data. How do we organize it? How do we search it? And I started to realize like there should be a company, like a sort of infrastructure software company that could do this, and had been working on it on the side, just kind of
Mhm.
coming up with my own concepts actually as a podcast discovery tool.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and so that
That's
was
what
kind of,
Twitter. I think Twitter was originally supposed to be that, right?
yeah, yeah. With Odeo, I think,
Yeah,
and
you remember Rodeo too? Oh,
yeah,
you.
exactly. And so, I mean, that was like 6 or 7 years ago, and I just started to kind of build up layers of this platform, and finally was like, okay, look, I mean, it's now or never. I mean, there's still not a company out there, like there's not like the snowflake of unstructured data or
Right.
the 5 trillion of unstructured data. And so I started, I mean, basically raised some money and started working on it. But back then it was still too early, and people were still not getting the value of unstructured data. It was pre-LLM, pre-chat
Right.
GPT. And so we started building a data cataloging layer, a tool on an application on top. So it was a UI that we would sell to customers, and they could put in their data and organize it.
Right.
And we had tied into the built world, like construction, engineering, ports.
Tons
And
of unstructured data in that space.
yeah,
Tons.
inspection reports and all kinds of stuff. And so, but it was still a little early for them because they were still like, well, we already paid for SharePoint. Why would we need this? and like, and they just hadn't had that.
Because SharePoint does everything, right?
I know. And that's, I mean, that's when you start to try and sell into somebody that's like, well, we're already paying $5 a person for SharePoint. Why would we need this? And so we kind of, I hit a point where, I mean, LLMs had come out. I kind of realized, wow, we're actually perfectly suited to connect what we've already done to like LLMs, this kind of concept of RAG. I mean, retrieval augmented generation, which is really just do a search, essentially, organize data, provide it to the LLM to get the answer in a simplistic way. And I started to realize that that was what we'd already built. I mean, and we already had a big piece of that done. And that ChatGPT experience, people were familiar with. And so now we had a data point to be like, hey, we're kind of like that. And that was really the turning point. And so we ended up pivoting and kind of going back to our original goals of selling a platform. And that was kind of, when I first started, I kind of debated, like, do we sell an app? Do we sell the platform? And what GraphFlit is kind of the flip side of where we started, which is we're just an API. And so now anybody can build an application like we were building before. And so that was really and that's been, I mean, I guess about 18 months ago that happened. And now, I mean, it's been, I mean, upslope, completely from there.
Nice. Fantastic. Fantastic. So was it the AI that sort of triggered this, or was it just the pivoting to, what was it, AI that?
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I mean, and the funny thing is, we already were using AI in a sense. Like we were building knowledge graphs, we were doing transcriptions, we were doing things, but it got faster, it got cheaper, and it got more capable. And so before, we could build a knowledge graph of terms, but we couldn't build a knowledge graph of entities, like all the metadata around it. And that was what LLMs really helped with. The other is LLMs now can be used for document preparation, like OCR type operations. We're in the medical space, there's like heavy tables and really detailed charts and things like that, that even some of the best in class things can't support well. But you could give it to one of the latest vision models and it can actually pull that data out. And so it just keeps getting better. But for us, we're like software infrastructure. I mean, the APIs, the models we use and things like that will always get faster and cheaper. And you can basically just keep putting data into us. And I mean, it just works. And so that's really, we're trying to be an easy button for developers to deal with this kind of data. And we'll kind of keep up with the Joneses of all the new models and all those kind of things. So we're really kind of like workflow orchestration plus a search engine and storage.
Nice. What's funny is that like those are probably some of the most profitable companies, but they're so unsexy for some people.
Yeah, I mean, and I think for me, I like it because it's a sticky market. I mean, I mean, and we then can optimize for costs. We can help people. I mean, today we save, I mean, probably a developer year out of the box. Like, I mean, you can sign. You don't have to basically
an AI developer year or a human developer year.
Well, yeah, somewhere in between maybe. But I think it's really interesting because what we let people do is, as a service, they can integrate us in a few days, really, and it would be something they would have to build themselves. And so their developers, pretty much they get a developer back that doesn't have to kind of continually maintain this and tune it and, I mean, figure out deployment, CI/CD, all that kind of stuff. They get something that's just, hey, here's an API. And and that's really our goal, is give them a developer back that they can work on their application they're selling, not just build, like nobody wants to build their own database. So
yeah. So you mentioned RAG earlier, like you were saying something about, can you explain, like they were saying that RAG would actually slow down or sort of reduce the amount of hallucinations that AI has. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah,
How would that work?
I mean, basically, when an LLM answers, it's pulling from its training data, and so
Yeah.
it's you're asking a question. It's trying to find, okay, what do I know about this, and obviously, and then, but with RAG, you're giving it data to talk about, and so the retrieval part is you're taking the prompt and you're trying to kind of give a subset of data to kind of guide the LLM in the response. And there's positives and negatives to that, but the hallucination is like it's not trying to guess in those milliseconds of that it has to answer. It's actually you're giving it something to kind of guide its path and maybe giving it data that it can use to give you back an answer. So
is it actually going out and getting the answer?
No. So well, I mean, it depends on where you look at the RAG pipeline. There's a search happening in the background, but the LLM itself isn't doing it. You're just giving it text. So really, the way we look at it, it's almost like compiling a prompt. That just like if you were in ChatGPT and you wanted to paste a prompt into ChatGPT, what we do is we kind of compile that text that you could just copy and paste into a model, and we compile it for you based on a search and re-ranking and filtering and all these different things. But at the end of the day, it's still just text that goes to the model. But then there's a lot of other stuff. Well, how do you make sure you got the answer back that you wanted? How do you make sure that, I mean, it didn't just give you garbage and like, I mean, you need to retry. There's all that other kind of stuff. And also keeping the conversation history. But really the big part of it is in the retrieval. It's, can you find the right data that you want the LLM to answer on? That's really where the heart of the problem is.
Right. Very cool. And so who are you targeting? Like, who's your target market?
I mean, really, we always say it's developers building vertical AI apps. So the vertical could be healthcare, fintech, I mean, consumer. We don't do anything specific to any one of those verticals. It's really, you're trying to build an application that leverages AI and unstructured data, and you can, instead of building all this stuff yourself, build on top of our API, and you basically can move a lot faster and cheaper. And so we've really not seen, I mean, we've seen a really wide diversity of types of developers, stages of development, and that's what we hope for. I mean, to really keep it to anybody can build on this.
And does the data have to be sort of ingested? You have to ingest the data, right? Yeah,
so we do have to pull the data in at some point. And so that's where we have data connectors. We have what we call feeds that are kind of continual data ingestion, anything from email to Google Drive to an S3 bucket. And that's a big part of this area is like, but there's a kind of diminishing returns. There's probably 20 or 30 or more connectors that everybody has to build, but they're not new connectors. I mean, being invented every day. I think, and that's what we found is, I mean, there's a sweet spot of like things that people need. And then it just becomes, okay, what do you do with that data over time? And so I think that's where it's not really a moat, but any company getting into this space, like that first year or two, you're just building a lot of connectors. And then after that, you're really refining the whole process. So.
Yeah, because nobody wants to, I mean, it's the easiest way to get the data, right? You have to connect it. And like you said, you probably hit 80% of the connectors by doing what you've got. And I'm assuming you may get custom requests every now and then, but do you have any issues with companies saying, oh, you're ingesting our data, we don't like that?
It's where that comes into, especially in some of the more regulated areas like healthcare and fintech. The way we're answering it right now, so there's a couple things. So we provision storage for every project that you create. So it's like every back end of an application is a dedicated storage account on the cloud. And so that helps kind of partially solve that. We are multi-tenant SaaS though, but we do get folks that are like, well, I just want to run this in my own Azure subscription and be completely sandbox. So that's something we're actually planning over the next couple of quarters is you could essentially get your own GraphFlit platform instance running. But I mean, that obviously there's costs associated with that. You're not going to benefit from kind of a serverless, like, hey, I'm paying for what I need. You're actually going to have to pay for whatever's lit up and for that month. But yeah, we do get that question. But I think for a lot of companies, it's something they can deal with. I mean, we're multi-tenant. I mean, they can partition their data, it's secure, encrypted, all that kind of stuff. So it's enough for them. But I mean, and I think people are understanding, like, you have to read the data somehow. Like,
Right.
it's not, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to do it like on-prem or in place where
Oh
their
yeah.
data is.
And these highly regulated industries, they understand that, right? And
Yeah.
they cost
Yeah.
them it costs them more, and they know it's going to be like that. So
Yeah.
that's not an issue.
Yeah.
So let's it's time to talk about the future. It's time to think like a futurist. It's the year 2034, 10 years from now.
Okay.
Where will this be? I mean, where will you be? Where do you see the world in 10 years?
It's interesting. I mean, I think from a knowledge management standpoint, it's just going to become kind of part of our lives. I mean,
Right.
I think there's been sort of like Microsoft tried to do this with their like, hey, you could search everything on your desktop. There's a couple apps like this, but I think it's going to need to be another wave of usability of how
Mm,
how we interact with AI. I think chatbots were kind of the easy low hanging fruit for
yeah.
this kind of wave, but I really think there's going to be another wave. I mean, it could be
Interesting.
agents, it could be something that just is, I mean, it's a different modality, I think. And I'm really interested to see what evolves. Like, I really don't think a chatbot is the end game, but the technology behind it of knowledge management, knowledge extraction, all that. And that's where I think, I mean, to me, I think there's going to be something that's more agent-like. It's just
Mm,
APIs. I mean, it's
yeah.
APIs and workflows.
Yeah.
And
On the
I think,
back end, but for the user, it's just
yeah,
a. But see, I'm always thinking. I think one of the things about what's brilliant about ChatGPT and the other chatbots is that a chatbot is basically how humans communicate, right? We are talking to each other,
yeah,
and this is just people chatting through text. So I think it was brilliant for them to use that interface. And do you think that'll
yeah.
continue or?
I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, and when I say that chatbots may not be the end game, I mean, it may be something where maybe it's not a chat app per se
Right.
that
Yeah.
you're going to. Like, it could be, I mean, in my phone, I'm texting a virtual agent that is like, and I mean, the interaction may be, hey, it just appears in Slack. Like, I
Yeah.
just at something on Slack that's like another employee that is virtual. And I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where I see it going more, where, I mean, it still could be chat, it could be voice, but I mean, all of that maps to a request response, kind of a Q&A
Yeah,
model.
exactly.
Um,
And it's always seems to be like reactive too, right?
yeah,
It's never proactive. And that's one of the things that really annoys me about my like Amazon Alexas and all these other assistants is that they know a lot of things they know a lot about me, but they don't
yeah.
proactively help me.
And
I
that's
have to wait
actually
to
where
ask them.
it's exactly that. I mean, we did something, we called it an alert. It was kind of like a background task that would check on something in the background and then alert you in Slack, say like, hey, summarize my email for me, or let me know if there's an important thing I missed. And I think I guess not even asynchronous, like just like you said, like it's a background thing, it's proactive. It's a push model, not a pull model.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really think that is untapped right now. There's not, I think it's probably something we're going to see over the next few years, and then kind of understand that once we get that flow working between the two, then I mean, it's like, yeah, I could be like, hey, like, go pay my bills, or tell me what bills I need to think about, or whatever. I mean, that's sort of a back and forth, and then it can come back
Yeah.
and have that human in the loop. That I think will be really, really interesting. And I
Yeah.
think, I mean, I'm definitely more, I mean, having worked at General Motors for a while when they bought Cruise, and the time frame of when they were like, oh, we're going to have autonomous cars in like 3 years, more, I'm definitely more a skeptic
Yeah.
than for the future. And I think things will happen, but they do happen at a little slower rate
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
a lot of people think. So,
Yeah, like I like to say, everything takes longer than you think. Always. Everything always takes longer than you think. And then, especially when it comes to new technologies, it's almost like it's fits and starts, right? I mean, we have
yeah,
all of a sudden generative AI is here. All of a sudden, people there's this huge wave of interest, and now we're. I mean, I read today that people were talking about, oh, it's entering the trough of disillusionment. We're already getting to that
yeah,
point, and I'm like,
yeah.
and these cycles are getting faster and faster, right? So it's so hard to keep up with everything that's going on.
It really is. And I think that's going to be the thing of, I mean, I mean, you just got to keep the ball moving forward. And then, I mean, because it's really, if you look at it, you can look at it in a sort of critical way of the models have gotten better, but it hasn't been such an inflection point from like the first kind of ChatGPT 4 kind of wave, even 3.5 was such a major, like,
Huge.
it changed the world. I mean, it like people, the average person now talks about it, maybe uses it. But now when we're looking at it, it's just we're in a refinement kind of phase.
Yeah.
I think it'll be really interesting, and maybe it's not possible technically. I mean, but is there going to be another big inflection point that moves up? And I think we're in that kind of like we're absorbing the capabilities phase. And so maybe that kind of is how that curve gets ridden. So.
Yeah. What do you see is that what the path that we're currently on will actually lead us to AGI, or do you think that it won't?
Whew. I'm more skeptical on it.
Yeah. See, anybody who's actually understands the industry and understands machine learning and understands AI and all the underpinnings is skeptical, right? Because it's like when you know what goes into the sausage, you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I mean, I think I just feel like it could be one of those things, just like autonomous, where it's going to take 5x longer than anybody thought.
Yeah.
I just don't, I mean, the models are nowhere close to I mean, they're great at amazing things, but
oh, sure. They can do a lot.
Even the ability now to prompt them and guide them. Like I would say that like, if I didn't have to get so specific about prompting to ask for things and even like we were saying the negative, like don't do this, don't do that, then I would say maybe we're closer to AGI. But right now, like I could be like don't put a period at the end of the sentence or something, like things like that. Like you can't ask it things that you could ask a human. Or even like,
or it'll listen to you for a while and then it stops listening to you. Like I say, like at one point I have one chain where I'm creating SEO descriptions. I say it's got to be exactly less than 160 characters. And it works fine for maybe about 2 or 3 weeks. And then it starts creeping up and creeping up. And I'm like, wait a minute, you're a machine. I gave you an explicit instruction, but you're not following it. Why?
That's the most frustrating part is, I mean, somebody that's been doing development for years, I think of it a lot as, it reminds me a lot of the text adventure games from the 80s, where you really don't know where you're heading and you're trying to find the right like way to talk to it to get where you want to go. And prompt engineering to me and I think it's a big difference in how you have to approach things because or like you said, you try it next week, it works differently. Even you could hit it 3 times and you'll get a different answer. You just have to adapt to that. And it's a very different model for software development. And I mean, it can be very frustrating too. I mean, if you're like, I want you to do one thing, but then on the other hand, it can do amazing things for time savings. Like I was adding in these medical entities and I said, I had this list of like, for this one app of emojis for every entity, like a person, an organization. And so I gave it this list of like 11 medical entities. And I said, hey, come up with an emoji that I can display in our app. And it was like, boop, did it. And it just figured it out. And I was like, okay, that saved me 15 minutes of just like figure it like that's, but that time compression is insanely powerful. And, but there's other things.
But you lose it on the other side, though.
Right. And so I think it'll be really interesting with the AI sort of enabled development is going to be really interesting. Like I don't believe the whole it'll just remove developers. Like I've been around long enough that the bar just keeps moving higher.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I was just about to ask you that.
Yeah. I've been doing development now for a long time. So it's like there was 4GL, there was all the different things that everybody thought like things were gonna, like no code was gonna kill developers. And I think everybody adapts and it's just a fluid cycle. I think it'll be interesting for new developers getting into the space now, where they use Cursor or GitHub Copilot or one of these things that as a natural way of getting started. Right. That's what I'm excited about. Like to see what do AI native developers do, because I'm still kind of old school. Like I use it for some things, but it's like it's not a natural part of my development cycle because I haven't gotten into the point of like, how do I talk to something to code? Like I do all my coding in my head, not talking to an AI. And so I
Exactly.
think it'll be a new generation that does that.
Absolutely. Well, this is very cool. Thank you so much. It's been great. So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, Twitter is good. I'm just Kirk
Twitter.
Marple. Okay, but just Kirk Marple or GraphFlit there, and LinkedIn as well as, and our website is just graphflit.com. So
very cool. So I'll put all the links in the show notes, so if someone wants to get in touch with you, they can go direct. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye.
Pixels and philosophies merge and mold, a future untold, unseen.